Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. Just doing the claim host thing here. Give me one moment.
I'm in the car still coming back from my event, so
Okay.
but I'm not driving, so I have my full attention.
All righty. So there we go. I am now the host, and then what else am I supposed to do? Okay. Click on live transcript, which is located next to the green share button. And then enable live transcription.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, how are you?
I'm
Hi.
good. I'm backlit for some reason, but
Alrighty, I'll turn on my camera and there I'll be front lit.
wow, new look, new background, Sean.
New background, less hair. So, so how are you doing?
Great. I took the summer off of Wakefield stuff, so I feel a little bad about that. But here we are in fall.
Oh, well, I'll dive into fall.
Oh, yes.
So,
Do not worry.
So before we go any further, I do just want to remind everyone that in addition to the transcription, everything, I'm not sure, Julie, Myra, if you already knew this, but the recordings of all these subcommittee meetings actually do get posted. I did find them online, so I can't imagine anyone is that excited to watch it, 5 or 6 times over, but but the recording's not just for posterity, it is auto posted. So figured I would just make sure we all realize that. So I knew it for other meetings. Didn't realize it was necessarily the case for the subcommittee meetings. But I'm excited that we're able to find this time to chat. So I'll just pull up the agenda really fast and we can go from there. And don't know how long any of this will take us, but the agenda was simply call to order. So here we are. Public engagement, which there doesn't seem to be any. So really just diving into brainstorming goals and activities for the subcommittee for the year. At some point as a separate item or during the course of that, discussing the coordination with the Conservation Commission, the things that came up, and Julie, I assume you might have some more to share on that, and then just figuring out how often we're going to meet and in what format. I've heard some of the other groups have met in person recently, and I'm all for that moving forward. So, all right. Anything else that anyone thought we should discuss today? Or, I mean, item 3 is kind of a catch-all.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All righty. So there's auto transcribing, but I'll take some notes for follow-up. So brainstorming of goals and activities for subcommittee. Who wants to start?
Well, I know that one thing that we've had on our committee agenda for a while, and I know that the Conservation Commission is thinking about in their open space plan too, is a potential bylaw change that would have to go to town meeting or go to town meeting for discussion around changing their protected status of the town forest. And trying to get a little bit of a higher level of protection for that land. Not feeling like it's necessarily a huge risk that it will be developed, but also not feeling entirely confident that there's enough of a barrier to that development if circumstances were to change. And that as a, having been in that recently, it is such a sort of treasure of, we don't have a lot of green space in town, but that's such a, it's big enough that it feels like you're out there. Which I really appreciate. And I feel like any change to that footprint or shrinking of that footprint would have an impact. Mm-hmm. So, and I guess I admit that I don't know the trajectory from the open space plan that Judy came and talked to the whole committee in the spring. and said they were kicking off. And I know, Sean, you're going to join that committee, which is great, but I don't know sort of what the trajectory or the timeline is for that, and whether, if we thought about a bylaw change, whether it would be a fall town meeting or a spring town meeting or that kind of timeline.
So yeah, I think we have somebody Judy's coming tomorrow to our ESC meeting.
Oh, great.
So we can ask her. So, and we can and should ask her about that. So in terms of what we could do to provide input there, yes, I was planning to be part of the open space committee. I was just waiting to hear back as to how that proceeds. But what else do you think we could be doing to try to, certainly providing input. One thing that we were talking about more broadly was also just trying to increase the community awareness of open space as recreational opportunities around ecosystem services that might be provided. I think the last few weeks have really shown too that Eastern Massachusetts is not immune from wildfires and other things. So, all these things about how we manage and perceive our open space. So the
other question I've had for a long time, and I've talked with other community members while sort of out using our trails, is really defining who's responsible. Who's responsible for maintenance of our green spaces. And I think it also, like, as with, the master planning is thinking about how we use land. But you go into the town forest and there's parts of the trails that really need maintenance. And when I've talked to the conservation, I thought it was the Conservation Commission. So I asked them and they said, it's not us. Sometimes the Boy Scouts do some maintenance, but I think that there's a need for some small level maintenance of like just clipping things like along the trails in the town forest. There's a need for some like bridges or something if you go into Reedy Meadow. Maybe not now, but other times, when it's been wetter. And there are other examples of towns that, if you go to the Linfield side of Reedy Meadow, they have this beautiful boardwalk through their component that allows sort of year-round access to that space. And I just sort of dream of Wakefield having something comparable, but that's an investment, an upfront investment, and then a sort of definition of whose job it is to maintain it. And not sure that we have an answer to either of those questions of, I think the Boy Scouts in the past have built some things. There was an Eagle Scout project that built the town forest trail, which is great, but that doesn't have a maintenance plan. And, there was Boy Scouts that did some of the work in the Reedy Meadow, but that, again, that's a cool project and they're willing to, do what they can, but that doesn't feel to me like a sustainability plan.
Yeah,
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's an excellent point. Myra, I'm not sure you were on when I said I'm in the car, so
yeah,
camera. But I think that is, not only identifying the areas, which I think will happen in the open space plan, but kind of mapping them. I'm unclear on kind of how much of that is actually mapped out trail wise, and then maintenance is really important. And I do think that what differentiates us from the Concom is that we can be a little more kind of an advocates and awareness raising, whereas they adjudicate. So I think that they can help inform, but we could really help get the word out as well.
When you're talking about Myra, when you're talking about this idea of trying to see more things like this happen or somehow encourage that, are there foundations or other groups that might provide resources? Can a town committee be involved in trying to gather resources for things like this? How would we, beyond the idea of like the Boy Scouts, providing labor for something like this? And I know that like Eagle Scout projects, they go and fundraise for that, but what would, if we had something more ambitious in mind, like a boardwalk, that.
Well, I'd be curious how other towns do it. And I haven't done the research, but if you go into Reading, for example, they have these beautiful trails. And, I spent a lot of COVID on trails in town. You know, I spent some time on the Wakefield trails too. You know, I think I haven't hiked Crystal Lake yet around that area, but the other trails, I think I've been to all the trails I know about in Wakefield. So I don't know how it's done. I don't know whether it's written into the DPW budget, or it's the Conservation Commission has a budget, or, you know, I just don't know. But I know that in our Conservation Commission, it's, you know, when I asked, they were like, not our job. Mm-hmm. Which is not in their scope. I should say that. I don't know. I just think it's worth asking.
Well, they're a volunteer committee, so it wouldn't be in their scope. It would have to be probably in the DPW. My bet is it's in the DPW budget, and we can find that out for sure. There is a grant program, a state grant program called Mass Trails, and I don't know whether we've ever gotten any money from it, but I do think there is some state funding as well as probably private funding, if we have a plan, right? But I don't think this ad hoc Boy Scout is a plan, probably, right, that is sustainable.
So in terms of you know, goals and activities for the subcommittee, I think a pretty possibly important one, but certainly not biting off too much, would just be to call a few towns where we've seen good things. Linfield and Reading you just mentioned, and just find out how they do it and how those things have been initiated, funded, supported, maintained. And Myra, I absolutely hear you. Like during COVID, especially early on in COVID, I found myself in town forests in other towns because the state parks felt very crowded. I still wasn't sure, you know, what my comfort level was, going for a hike with the kids or whatever. And, you know, we ended up just in other towns nearby, and less so right here in our own backyard. So yeah, maybe we can make some connections, reach out that way. And then as well as maybe invite, you know, reach out to DPW and just see what is already in the budget, what types of things they do actively, what the capacity is. I imagine there's not a lot of excess capacity, but
yeah, I mean, I do think there's somebody who's doing some trail maintenance. You hike in the town forest apart from JJ Rounds, and like if a tree has fallen down, there's a chainsaw, you know. So I don't want to make it seem like it's not maintained at all. I just know that there are some parts where, you know, the plants that grow faster are just sort of growing over the trail. Especially, we went down to the Maple Way side of town forest somewhat recently, maybe a couple months ago, and that part seemed a little bit less well maintained, with like the shrubs, like the stuff that's really not a lot of work, but it just, you know, it just requires attention.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we talked about in the past, and I think is still really important, was just trying to increase awareness about what does exist, give people information about that. I have been part of the community education group. We're using the Facebook, we're using the Facebook ESC page to try to set, so we now have a schedule every few days of announcements that are going out. And I thought that some of the land use subcommittee's work could be to try to create information that could be distributed there and elsewhere. The other thing we had talked about there was using the school committee members as a way of trying to share information and see if there are opportunities for sharing in general sustainability information through the schools, having the students provide that information if they can write columns in their school newspaper, things like that. And then using the ESC Facebook page just to share those things out to the larger Wakefield community groups. We really haven't had a presence there. It's an inexpensive way to do this, right? So when something gets posted on the Wakefield Environmental Sustainability Committee, that reaches the few hundred people who follow it. But if we share those things to the two largest Facebook groups for the town, then we have, you know, 15,000 on one group, 10,000 on the other. I think the overlap between those two groups is huge, but still, you know, that's thousands of people instead of a few hundred people. Is this Samsung SM G950U, is that one of us, or is that a public participant?
Sorry, it's Judy Green. I was having a connection problem with my laptop. So
no worries.
My phone.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Well, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. Glad you found us and joined us. So this is just the land use subcommittee group. So we had a very simple plan for today of just talking about what we want to get done this year, but we were chatting about you a little bit earlier. And you're planning on joining the ESC meeting tomorrow as well?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I just want to jump on and see what ideas are out there.
Yeah, well, so you might have answers to some of the things we were discussing already. Myra, do you want to go back to kind of what you were mentioning before, and we can loop Judy in?
Yeah, so Judy, I when you came and talked to the ESC meeting in the spring, I was loving the fact that you were talking about the sort of the town forest and what the protected status of that is, and so thinking about how the ESC could support you all and thinking about that that process, or that, you know, whether or not that's really a potential to increase the protection of that land, since we all know how vital it is. And then we were saying that, you know, really thinking about being clear about whose job it is to maintain the trails within our, you know, we need a sustainability plan as we sort of promote and we try to get people to take advantage of the trail resources that we do have in town, making sure that we're not putting strain on those, and that there's a plan to sort of maintain those trails. And so I know you said, or I think somebody in conservation let me know in the past that the sort of the Boy Scouts have taken on that role. And that's awesome for development. And I have a Boy Scout. I know that's, but that's not like a sustainability plan necessarily. And so just making sure that we're aware about sort of what those maintenance needs are, and that we're accounting for those as we think about promoting and expanding green space in town.
Well, generally what happens in other towns is they have volunteer trail stewards that walk the trails regularly, report back. Melrose, for example, they report back once a month on any, you know, downed trees, any issues, dumping. A couple of times there was a bordering area with Wakefield and Melrose that they had a couple of vehicles that were stored, you know, pushed back too far and they were on town land. So things like that. Generally, by and large, there isn't a lot of town maintenance of the trails unless there's a big issue, like a large tree came down, something like that. Some of the bigger towns, like Cambridge, has a pretty big budget for that, but they also have, they're developing an urban forest plan. They had University of Vermont, they have a spatial analysis lab, and they use LiDAR technology, and it charted their entire canopy town-wide, and it included all vegetative cover, not just town properties. So they have an actual real-time accounting of how much cover they have, what areas could need more cover, especially in environmental justice areas. So that's something that I've reached out to them to get more information on. I don't know what the cost is. I know they use some MVP funds, so maybe that's something that could be pursued, some grants. But I think Brookline also has an urban forest master plan for how they promote vegetative areas in town, try to encourage homeowners to plant more shrubs, trees, things like that, and also care for the town trees that are maybe right in front of their houses, or an adopt-a spot, things like that. So I think that's something we could, you know, move to, that I'd like to see move to in the future. So there's a concrete plan.
And we have a couple people in town, and they reached out in the past, and they reached out to me privately that have a real interest in trees. Either sort of thinking about making sure we're planting native species of trees when we can, knowing that there's restrictions on, you know, like the trees have to be like not salt sensitive, like all these things about sort of street trees. But there is definitely a couple people that I know that are very, very interested in thinking about how do we improve the quality of the trees that we have, in addition to sort of maintaining our trees.
Right. And the planning board is actually in the process of updating their subdivision rules and regulations. And part of that covers the street trees. And there's actually on, in the Inspection Services website under the zoning bylaws. That's where their rules and subdivision rules and regs are kept. And there's a list of accepted street trees. But if you look at other towns, maybe there are other trees that could be added or things like that. And I think the planning board could use support too, because it's a big task updating their rules and regs. And I think they'd be open to, hearing different opinions and, getting different perspectives.
That's great.
Especially as it comes to environmental sustainability. A lot is talked about with strictly open spaces, but how does it function is what really needs to be looked at now. Do we have well-functioning open spaces? And are we preparing to be resilient in the face of climate change? I think that's a big proposition that needs to be tackled.
Absolutely, Judy, and that's one of the things we touched on briefly before you jumped on was what are the ecosystem services being provided by our current open spaces, educating the public on that, as well as trying to do some work to assess how that matches up with the needs and, as you mentioned, the needs moving forward. We framed today's meeting around kind of coming up with action items and activities for the year. So this idea of you mentioned trail volunteers, that I want to come back to that, because that seems like something, again, that well within our bandwidth to do that could have a huge impact, is just trying to organize trail volunteers. I suspect Myra might already be
I have one in mind.
Yeah,
he came to fix my bikes.
Yeah,
like, hey, I bet you know.
But this idea of just having people who will walk the trails and report back to DPW about maintenance needs, even shy of coming together to do the work ourselves. So the other one was,
walk the trails with a pair of clippers and a little bit of knowledge about how to do responsible trail maintenance. I mean, I think that there are, we can do some of this as citizens. We don't want to encourage just people to cut down things if they don't know what they're doing. But if there was a little bit of guidance and we can sort of do some empowering of citizen volunteers to do that if they know what they're doing, I think that.
And like in Melrose, they report back to the Conservation Commission because open space is under conservation's purview. I think that may be a better way to go rather than DPW.
Okay. So, and you think having those volunteers report to the Conservation Commission here too would make sense?
I think so. I think it's something that maybe we could partner up with Melrose. And I'm pretty sure Stoneham has some as well, because there are some abutting trails off of Spring Street that we share with those two towns. So maybe having a discussion with them, because I have talked with the Melrose agent in the past about how they encourage trail stewards, and they don't have a problem getting volunteers. So I think it's just establishing a structure, as Myra was saying, what the expectations are, and people that regularly use the trails anyways, maybe that would be the, the type that you could tap into.
So another thing that the ESC is looking to do, and we have another subcommittee that I'm part of that is already doing this, is just trying to get more sustainability information out to the various town Facebook groups. And then we thought, or I was thinking the land use subcommittee, part of that could just be getting out information about these things. And I think this is a great way. We could be reaching out to members of the larger town Facebook groups, asking them to volunteer for this. Do you use the trails? What are your favorite trails? And so that's a way we could bring together the volunteers, as well as be pushing out information about the opportunities. One thing I was wondering about, and this is maybe half-baked, but I'm a big fan of the All Trails app. Like when I go somewhere for vacation, I just look and see where is there, because you can use it with the filters. Here's a 4-mile hike, that type of thing. I don't see a lot mapped out here. So I'm wondering if there are ways for us to also be mapping out the trails in Wakefield on All Trails, and then to use that for other purposes, like for volunteers. Because if you have All Trails open, it's very easy to say, there is a tree down blocking the trail at this point, and to bring up the GPS coordinates, and that type of thing. But I was wondering if trail mapping is something that volunteers and our committee members could be doing as well.
Oh, I think so. I think
that would find these opportunities.
Right. No, I think that'd be a great idea.
And that, I mean, that's how I found some of the town forests in neighboring towns, is just looking on that app and like, oh, I'll go there.
Right. The only, I don't know if it's on all trails, the Crystal Lake, there's a trail there. It's called the Crystal Lake Park, but it's actually the watershed, and it's posted that there's no trespassing, which is soundly ignored, but it's just, you just want to be careful that they're actually on town land when they're getting mapped. You know, that's one thing, because that is on a couple of trail sites and it shouldn't be. MAPC is one of the sites that it's on.
Yeah, well, that'd be something else we could do as a public education thing, is talking about places that should not be utilized perhaps for recreation or other things.
Right,
so,
because I think that could be part of the wayfinding that they've, there's a new initiative to identify different areas, different businesses downtown. And I think that's something that could also link up with open spaces, have a wayfinding signs, you know, different aspects of certain trails, the highest spot in Wakefield, you know, this one is a vernal pool, this, you know, just different aspects to attract people towards the trails and the open spaces.
Just the way you're saying that sounds like I'm picturing the Facebook postings, like, did you know the highest point in Wakefield is? And here's, so fortunately Crystal Lake Loop is not on all trails, so
okay, that's good to know.
That's what I was just checking. And then the other thing, Judy, that we were talking about before you joined was also just kind of reaching out to some of the towns where there seems to have been more development and seeing how the kind of resource some of that development, like
trail development, not like building development.
So so the boardwalk and on the Linfield side of Reedy Meadow, or some of the more developed trails in Reading and other towns.
Where were you were you thinking of Blazing Moor? I'm not sure. Are you talking about a specific trail where you wanted more accessibility, or? Well, I mean, you know, I haven't been out there this year, and it's probably perfectly accessible. But the Audubon Road Trail, I feel like is always underutilized because it's impassable, you know, in the wet. And I know there's sort of part, you know, you don't want too many people in Reedy Meadow, except that the Linfield side, it's really is a beautiful trail. That boardwalk has been there for quite some time. I'm a strong advocate against using Reedy Meadow because it's a critical core wetland habitat as designated by the state. It's a migratory stopover for birds, and any introduction of humans, which would bring dogs, it will just change the character of that area. So I'm not a fan of adding any kind of, the way I look at it is when it's flooding, it's nature's way of keeping you out. And it is such a sensitive habitat because once some of the birds leave, they're not going to come back once humans enter that. And that's what I'm afraid of if they ever extend the rail trail and finish that boardwalk. I mean, the majority, we won't have any say because it's not in Wakefield, but that's going to dramatically change that area, and it's not going to be for the better. You don't get it back. It doesn't revert back once you've changed it. And it's great, you know, people want a beautiful place to look at. They want an observatory area. That's not the space for it, I don't think. It's the only space we have in town like that. And that would, I think, ruin it.
Well, it sounds like it's still up for, there's still a lot of discussion happening around it, right?
Yes. Oh, I think Linfield is going full speed ahead.
Is there a way, I want to make sure that there's kind of a continuous bike trail somewhere. So maybe there's a way to work around that too.
Right. I'm sure there probably is.
Yeah. What about, and I'm sorry, I had like a 5-minute kind of outage there, but what about accessibility around Crystal Lake? Like a lot of that is posted no access. What are your thoughts on that?
It's turned into an off-leash dog park. So I'm not in favor of that either. I know people use it, but there are ATVs out there. It's completely trampled down. It's really sad the way it looks. And it's directly on top of Crystal Lake. Everything
Right,
that's
which is our
there,
water
all the
source.
dog waste that's left there goes right into Crystal Lake.
So, I mean, what if we did post it as, I mean, or maybe just try to have these volunteers monitor it or something better. I don't know. It seems like it's an issue in town.
But it's posted as no trespassing. So I think that's—
I know, but nobody enforces it.
Right. But I don't think opening it up to a trail, I think that I'm not in favor of that.
Okay.
So I think that part of this public outreach can also be on education about things that are not appropriate uses, and also maybe when possible encouraging people alternate places, venues for those activities. If there are things we can recommend, I don't want to annoy our neighbors by sending 50 ATV users to another town, but that could be part of, you know, that outreach. We were thinking recreational opportunities were a way of highlighting open space in Wakefield, but part of that could also be education around things that ideally there should be less of. Okay, so in terms of action items right now, I have this idea of reaching out to other towns to see just some of the things in terms of how they resource maintenance, when there is recreational development, other things in terms of how they've structured things. Judy already has a lot of institutional knowledge on that. So this idea of trail volunteers and maybe encouraging trail volunteers, trying to get a network of trail volunteers that would report to Conservation Committee if that is the most appropriate thing, as well as perhaps doing minor maintenance on our own as a volunteer network. Public outreach, working with community ed subcommittee to distribute that information, what they're already doing, and that's Tiana who's leading up much of that. Support and interface with the Conservation Committee, Planning Board. I'll join that open space committee if that opportunity is still there. And then Julie, I don't know if you're on, I had this idea about kind of trail mapping and where there are appropriate recreational trails, making sure that they're available. All trails is a way of initial way, just because it's one way people access stuff, but then also using that to share the information elsewhere. Were there other action items? I mean, with all these subcommittees, I think we have to realize we're a very small subcommittee. The committee is very small, so things that are within our bandwidth. I think if we do a few small things well, that'll help build momentum for other things. And that's much more my speed than trying to come up with, you know.
God, I have two other ideas.
Okay, great.
Well, I also wrote down, I think really talking to the planning board about around trees, and that's sort of that part of their updating rules and regulations is something, and I can follow up with that with people that I know that know a lot more about trees. Julie, you probably have some.
I don't know a lot, but I think what Judy was saying about the what, like, it sounded like an inventory kind of thing, right? Like an urban forest inventory.
Yeah, or even
thinking
thinking about the
tree inventories. I can't seem to get the information anymore. I don't know. I would love to just have a little more insight into trees and help however we can, because it's going to be critical from a climate standpoint.
And even like this, I mean, what people were saying to, and I don't remember her name off the top of my head, who reached out to us and reached out to Gas and Light when they were saying, you know, tell us where to plant street trees. And she said, can we get more native species on the list? Well, and there are native species that meet the criteria of like a good street tree and also can support life, you know, support the ecosystem in a better way than that might not.
I mean, we may need some expertise on some things like that.
Yeah, so I know a couple people who are interested and have some done. They're not arborists, but they've done some just personal interest on it. So my two other things I just want to keep on the list. One is Butler Ave, and I think that is a piece of green space that we own as a town now, and I would love if we could have an option to keep some of it as green space, even as we're thinking about what the development plan is for that. And I think it's very rare now that the town will have the opportunity to own 11 acres. And I know that there's a stream that goes right through there. And so I would really like just to keep that option. And I'm not I don't live in La La Land that we're going to be able to maintain, conserve all of that land. But it's really beautiful back there. If you go back, that when I walked, Julie, with your I walked that land, it
is pretty amazing piece of land.
Striking. It's really beautiful back there. And so can it just be part of the conversation about maintaining?
Well, and I guess maybe Judy, I just don't know, is the open space just existing open space, or are you guys also going to look at all town-owned land, which is what I, as a counselor, have asked. I'm done giving up tax title land without understanding it better. So
we're looking at all town.
Okay.
Land. Rebecca has put together a great mapping system that covers pretty much every area of town where there's a usable parcel, whether it's for along the Mill River, better plant base there, all different spots where there were parcels that were not tiny, not large, but could be pieced together with another and made more functional, better plantings to make it more sustainable, more resilient.
Yeah. So I like your idea of MVP money, municipal vulnerability. I don't know whether we've gone after grants recently for that.
Yeah, other towns have really done some innovative work with it. Just as in terms of rain gardens, I don't know if you've all been down Albion Street.
Yeah.
And the work that Bill put together, that came out great. I mean, it's such a great learning tool. It's a simple planting scheme, but it creates such a great outcome as a little rain garden. And I think using things like that as an education tool, what people can do in their own yard, maybe take a part of their lawn out and put in some native plantings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it looks so nice. He really did a great job.
Yeah, the rain gardens the stuff around the lake is really amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Bill has really been in the forefront of that. And it's really making a difference.
Yeah. So that
was my other idea. So when the news came out of the monarch butterfly being added to the endangered species list, I'm a little bit traumatized by that. But I was in Vermont at that time, in Middlebury, Vermont, where they have a pollinator pathway throughout town. And so they just have a ton of native plantings. And again, I think it has a sustainability plan to it, but it made me really think about, can we be thoughtful about where we do plantings, and can we plant, cultivated forms of milkweed, or can we just be thinking about that as a component? And there's, I think, a lot of places, I think about Patty Heights or Veterans Park, whatever you call it, there's plantings there. They're not native plants. As far as I know, I'm not an expert, but really just as we think about how can we enhance some of our spaces, include butterfly, I know bees sometimes can be, challenging for people, but just really sort of including those components in our plan so that we can, bring butterflies back to our community.
So in terms of things like that with the rain gardens on the lake, anything we're already doing, that I think we should definitely be feeding to Tiana and the public. Let's brag about this stuff. Let's increase awareness. That's going to bring people in with interest. That's going to show if people are appreciating this in demand. It's one thing to do it quietly. I think just anything we can share on that is great. Coming back to Butler Ave, is this something forgive my ignorance, but in terms of if this is going to be something where some percentage is likely to be sold, and and then how much can we hold on to? Is that going to be decided at town meeting through some other process?
I mean, we had to buy it back to have it remediated. As it will come to town council first. I haven't seen any plans. I think it's an open discussion. I think there is a desire to recoup what the town spent on it. But I think if you can make some arguments for value, different kinds of value, I think it's a 100% open question at this point. What will happen at Butler Ave? I think there's some people who are really looking at it as a way to help meet affordable housing or housing for seniors. So I think there's a lot of different, again, value propositions for that land, and we should be part of the conversation.
I think
There
also
will certainly be areas you can't build on because of the way we remediated it.
Mhm.
So then it just becomes, how do you cap
That's
it so that
a
it can be used?
pathway into the land in the back where it's.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know,
One thing-
Judy, you may know more about it. You guys have probably been involved, but I don't even think we've gotten the remediation sign off yet.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
If not, it's close, but I don't think
Yeah.
that.
I think there's
Yeah.
another area for public education and outreach. You know, as somebody who was an outsider in Wakefield for several years before I started getting involved in more town things, I just think, you know, town business, if you don't subscribe to the different,
Yeah,
you know, to the updates on the webpage, which I finally figured out how to do, if you don't get the Wakefield daily item, there's not a lot, right? So I think even just translating these things to social media, that's a good way. We cannot and should not say to people, go and voice your support for more green space on Butler Avenue, but we can say, hey, did you know that X years ago, the town purchased Butler Avenue to remediate this, and now there's a question at town meeting, or this is being discussed at town council. If you're interested in this, come and find out more, right? That we can say, just whenever there's a sustainability issue at town meeting or somewhere else, we can be promoting that in a very neutral way, of promoting the information about that so that people go and have their voices heard on whatever side of the issue they might be on. I think that can only be good to have that discussion more broadly. And I think that the more discussion of sustainability issues there are, then, you know, the more effort and attention to it there will be, and we'll see better outcomes. You know, even if, you know, on any one thing, it might not be any one of our preferences. So also with some of the things you were just talking about now with kind of the, I was wondering if we wanted to connect with any of the groups that do provide some technical assistance around pollinator issues and other things. So Tufts, where I work, has a very active pollinator group. They've been doing model projects that have been adopted and copied by others. I know some of the folks who are doing that. So just on this issue of pollinators, that's a place where I happen to know a place to start. But obviously we're blessed in the Boston area to have a lot of universities and that kind of knowledge. So if there are areas where we do want to reach out for that kind of technical assistance to help around town priorities, or if we already, you know, and again, I'm saying this kind of as a newcomer to some of these things, so I know that there's a lot that's been done in the past, but
no, I think any kind of education awareness. I mean, the Concom did some really interesting things around light pollution. I mean, I would love to see the ESC and the Concom maybe pair up and do some things together to really show that we're trying to work together towards things.
And the Greenwood School has a really active they have a pollinator garden, and they have a sort of group of parents who really maintain it. And that, like, one year they did a fundraiser and they sold seeds to sort of local or native plants that are pollinator plants. And so I feel like we could also, if we wanted some community engagement, that would be another group of people who may, you know, they've been very they spoke to the ESC like the first year, Julie.
Yeah, they were part of the whole the kind of the food rescue group.
But there's different people, I think, that do the garden itself. And so
I think we have some beekeepers too. Rob used to know some beekeeping around as well.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think anything like that we can do, and again, highlight things that are already being done and can be easily replicated.
All right, I feel like in terms of brainstorming priorities for the year, we've got several. I think some more things will come up. Judy, I was wondering, I mean, tomorrow, my understanding for the invite for tomorrow was one of the ththings I think the larger ESC wanted was a primer on what Concom does and kind of the regulatory function as well as other things it's involved in. So not trying to like make you do that conversation twice, but are there things for this smaller group where like you just have a need for more people or different ideas where we can be of help, things that weren't on this list of things we've talked about? And you've also given us some useful cautions about, you know, making sure we're threading the needle correctly with promoting recreational opportunities, that we're promoting ones that we want to promote.
I think just reinforcing the need for environmental sustainability, sustainable landscapes. I mean, I think that kind of gets lost sometimes in the conversation. People don't look at open space as what is the function and how does it help keep us resilient in face of, you know, severe drought like we're in now. Do we have trees that can withstand it? And that's definitely the native trees are more drought resistant, native planting, shrubs, flowers. Or do we have enough areas of open space for flood storage? Do we have enough trees in those areas for the water uptake? Things like that. It's it can be an overwhelming prospect sometimes, but I think if it gets down, if you can take it down to the granular level and people look at their own yard and whether it's a pollinator garden, a small planted area that could be for even some yard runoff as a small rain garden, it's a start to get your head wrapped around what is sustainability, how does it work? And then I think that it can snowball from there. I think it's just trying to understand the concept of sustainability and its partnership with resilience. And I think it's going to be critical as we move forward. But I think it helps to see it on a smaller level, and then it's easier to translate it to how it works on a larger parcel and why street trees are important and why the correct species of trees are important. I think that would, you know, just trying to bring landscape areas into the conversation. I know it's a lot on recycling, composting with your committee and sustainable buildings, things like that. But I think, I mean, I've mentioned the vote before, the building has been talked about, but the sustainability of that landscape, I don't think cutting out acres of forest for an access road is going to increase its resilience or its value for sustainability. So things like that, I'd like to see people get more cognizant of and how it will impact, you know, it doesn't matter if you live proximate to these areas, it is going to impact you one way or another. You know, the simple things, how it's the air we breathe, how it's healthier for mental health to be out in open spaces, things like that, that all tie in together that people don't really think of, you know, as the full picture.
Yeah. You know, we didn't really even touch upon the lake. And I know that's a big nut to crack, but just put it on the radar that I think there's a possibility that with some of the ARPA funds, there might be some movements to really finally invest in the lake and access to the lake and cleaning up the lake. So just keep that on our, you know, that may be something that we have to be more reactionary to if it does come up.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we've been going for 50 minutes here. Our agenda didn't have a whole lot else on it. I don't know if there were other things that we should discuss before we adjourn. Other than just how often we want to chat, and Myra and Julie, if you want me to try to arrange for our next meeting to be in person, happy to book a room at the library, and what the right timing is. I'm assuming for bandwidth, and I know everyone's busy, like once a month is as much as we want. We're not looking for more than that. Do you want to try to meet like in the days right before the next ESC meeting, or should we meet maybe a little bit sooner the next time so that we get more, so that we're not doubling up?
Maybe the week before?
We could try for a week before. So when is our next ESC meeting?
See.
The October ESC
we meet,
meeting.
What, the second Thursday, right?
Yeah. So that would be
the
the 13th. The 13th. So I'd be happy to aim for October 5th, which would be the Wednesday before.
Yeah, I can do the 5th.
Okay. So ESC land use subcom on the 5th, 7:30. Is that good?
Yep.
All right. And then I will look for him at the library, and I'll email Sherry, and we'll do the announcement that we're doing it that
Yeah,
night.
find out what we have to do. I don't know whether we still have to record if we're meeting in person.
Some of the other groups have met in person the last week, and they recorded
Okay.
They opened a laptop and recorded that way to
Okay.
at least get the transcript.
I'm sure it's been thought through. I just haven't heard. Yeah.
And the part I'm not sure about is if we also have to have a recording that then gets posted. I'm all for open meetings, but I also find it's a little weird to you know, 3 people can't talk without it being stuck on a YouTube page forevermore. So you know, but we'll figure that out.
Follow
Okay,
whatever
so
the rule it is. Yep, we'll follow the rule.
library at 7:30 on October 5th.
Awesome.
Okay, I will follow up with that then. And I've got some notes here to report back to. Just go on any final comments, anyone? Judy, Myra?
No, I think this was good.
No, thanks for putting this together.
Judy, do you want to be invited to these subcommittee meetings, right? Like, do you want me to email you the reminders that I'm sending out to Julie and Myra, or would you rather not?
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Okay.
I do want to say one more thing. I think the Conservation Commission open seat has not been posted yet. We're waiting for, there's a whole bunch that I think we're approving Monday night to get posted, and they're all going to get posted together. But I do think that when that does get posted, we should use our networks to raise that as an interesting position.
For the Open Space Committee?
No, don't you have a Conservation Commission?
Oh, an associate member. An associate member.
Oh, an associate member. So that means they're not voting?
Correct.
Okay. So it'll be a good way to learn about the Conservation Commission. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just think we should just, you know, raise it as there's going to be a lot of really in from a sustainability standpoint, you know, there's a permanent building position open. HRC is probably less us. I just got the list. Hold on, let's see. 1 opening on HRC, 2 openings on permanent building, 1 on housing authority, 1 on fence viewing, and then Conservation Commission. So anyway, just, you know, use our networks. Okay.
Thank you.
All righty.
See everybody tomorrow night, though.
Have a good one.
See y'all tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.